Welcome back to The Explainer. So today, we're looking at something absolutely fascinating, and frankly, pretty dramatic that just unfolded in space. The date is August 5th, 2026, and humanity has just left another permanent mark on the lunar surface. Except this time, it was completely by accident. We aren't talking about a gentle, carefully choreographed lander touching down. No, we are talking about a massive, high-speed collision. Okay, let's dive right into this. At exactly 6:35 GMT, a whopping 4-ton object slammed directly into the western limb of the moon, right near the Einstein and Bell craters. And it didn't just bump into the surface. It hit at a blinding speed of 8,690 kilometers per hour. To put that into perspective, that is roughly 5,400 miles per hour. Now, NASA confirmed with 100% certainty that this collision was going to happen, and thankfully it posed absolutely no danger to Earth. But it did leave us all wondering, what exactly was this giant object? And how on Earth, or rather, off Earth, did it end up there? Well, Section 1. How did it get there? Let's take a look at the origin of Object 2025-010D. To understand how a piece of space junk the size of a 5-story building actually hits the moon, we need to go back a little bit. The object itself was the discarded upper stage of a SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket. It all started over a year and a half ago on January 15, 2025. A Falcon 9 lifted off from the Kennedy Space Center. Its mission was actually a total success. It deployed Firefly Aerospace's Blue Ghost 1 lunar lander as part of NASA's CLPS initiative. Now, the first stage of that rocket returned safely to Earth to be reused, which is totally standard. But the upper stage, the part that pushed the lander toward the moon, stayed in space, left behind drifting in a highly elliptical orbit. Now, usually, SpaceX performs maneuvers to dispose of these second stages safely, which they say they did. But as Juliana Schiemann over at SpaceX points out, space is a highly dynamic environment. Basically an unpredictable mixture of gravity forces from the Earth, the Moon, and the Sun, combined with the pressure of solar radiation, caused this massive metal cylinder to drift uncontrollably. And what I find absolutely amazing here is that independent astronomers, just using publicly available data, were actually the very first to spot this trajectory shift. NASA's Jet Propulsion Lab then crunched the numbers and confirmed it with 100% certainty. The rocket was, without a doubt, going to hit the moon. Let's move on and see how this builds. Section 2, Impact by the numbers. We really need to understand the scale of this collision because the physics of an object this large hitting the moon at those speeds are truly staggering. Right, so when that 4-ton rocket stage struck the lunar surface, it released an estimated 14.5 billion joules of energy. If you're wondering what 14.5 billion joules actually looks like in practice, it is strictly equivalent to detonating roughly 3 tons of TNT directly on the lunar surface. It's just a massive, incredibly violent release of energy. And an explosion of that magnitude leaves a pretty serious mark. NASA predicted and is working right now to visually confirm that this tremendous force excavated a massive new crater on the moon. We're talking about a whole 18 meters, or 60 feet wide, and about 4 meters, or 12 feet, deep. The impact was so violent that it would have thrown lunar rock and dust rapidly outward, creating a gigantic plume of ejecta that stretched for miles across the airless lunar landscape. Now, what's really interesting about this is the comparison between a natural event and this artificial one. See, the moon actually gets hit by natural space rocks carrying this exact amount of energy about once every 6 days. It's constantly being bombarded. But natural meteoroids are totally random. We don't know their mass, their speed, or when they'll hit. This event, however, is incredibly unique because we knew it was coming. Scientists knew all the exact parameters beforehand: the time, the location, the exact speed, the mass, and the angle of approach. Which brings us to Section 3, an accidental science experiment. Let's talk about observing the plume. Knowing all these variables effectively turned an uncontrollable accident into a highly anticipated, controlled scientific experiment, just like Los Alamos National Lab researcher Benjamin Fernando pointed out. Suddenly, telescopes all over the world and spacecraft orbiting the moon had a very specific target to watch. To capture this incredibly rare data, NASA quickly put together a tiered observation plan. Step 1 relied on ground-based telescopes coordinated by NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center. Unfortunately, Earth's weather and lighting conditions hindered a lot of the real-time viewing, but a telescope operator down in Chile actually did manage to get an encouraging preliminary result of the impact plume. Steps 2 and 3 rely on our eyes in the sky. NASA's Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, which has been circling the moon since 2019, and South Korea's Danuri Orbiter.
And that brings us to the shadow cam aboard the Danuri orbiter. This is a cutting-edge piece of technology, approximately 200 times more sensitive than your standard lunar cameras. It's literally designed to peer into the darkest shadows of the moon. Now, these spacecraft weren't perfectly positioned to watch the crash happen live in real time. Because of orbital mechanics and lighting conditions, it's actually going to take several days for everything to align perfectly to capture those high-resolution before and after images of the new crater. But the wait will be absolutely worth it. And this brilliantly illustrates why scientists are so excited about this massive data drop. By studying the ejecta plumes from an object of a known mass and speed, researchers can reveal incredible details about the structure and composition of the moon's geology. They can test their seismic models, but most importantly, they can refine hazard models for future human exploration. All of this collected data is absolutely critical for NASA as humanity prepares to establish a sustained, long-term presence on the moon through the Artemis program.
Section 4. The Space Debris Dilemma. Let's take an objective look at our increasingly crowded orbit.
As valuable as this accidental science experiment is, it forces us to confront a much broader issue. While we got lucky with this impact hitting an empty stretch near the Einstein crater, experts are raising some very genuine concerns. Take this stark warning from Hannah Sargent at the University of Leicester. She points out that making a habit of randomly sending debris into the moon carries heavy risks. The lunar surface is home to sites of special historical interest. An uncontrolled 4-ton rocket could, in theory, wipe out one of the historical Apollo landers in an instant.
And the problem really isn't just on the moon. It's right in our own backyard. Cambridge University astronomer Matt Bothwell reinforces the severity of this issue, noting that space is becoming so heavily trafficked with active satellites and dead debris that within a few decades, it could feasibly become difficult just to navigate past Earth's orbit safely. So the crucial point is understanding the difference between what operators intend to do and what actually happens when we lose control. Controlled disposals, where a spacecraft is intentionally crashed into the moon at the end of its life, are actually a safe and accepted practice by NASA. They did it themselves back in 2009. It's predictable and trackable. But uncontrolled impacts like this Falcon 9 stage or the Chinese rocket stage that unexpectedly crashed into the moon back in March of 2022 are entirely different. They're subject to the unpredictable forces of space, and they introduce an element of risk that no one planned for. Ultimately, the August 5th collision gave scientists an incredible silver lining, a real treasure trove of data that will directly help us as we prepare to return to the moon. But as we look at the growing number of missions launching every single year, I want to leave you with this thought. As humanity returns to the moon to stay, how will we balance the incredible scientific data we extract from these impacts against the growing trail of debris we leave behind? It's a big question we'll have to answer, and soon. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep looking up.